Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Erin Laurie, and I'm the Executive Director of the Lake Huron Center for Coastal Conservation. Welcome to our brand new webinar series, and thanks so much for taking the time out of your evening to be here and talk with me about plastic pollution. So yeah, tonight's topic is plastic pollution, and I hope you'll bear with me. This is actually my very first time doing a digital webinar, so I'm still learning how to use this software, and hopefully you're all finding it easy to use as well. You'll notice somewhere on your screen there should be a button that says Q&A, and I just wanted to let you know that if you had any questions at any point that came up during the webinar, you can actually type those into the Q&A box, and those will pop up on my screen, and then hopefully at the end of the session, I'll have some time to answer some of your questions. So let's get started. I would just like to take a minute and thank our generous sponsors of tonight's webinar and of the entire webinar series. RBC and Bruce Power are sponsoring this, and without them, this wouldn't be happening. So thanks very much to them. So a little bit about the Lake Huron Center for Coastal Conservation. I've been with the center myself for 4 years now and executive director for 2 years. We're a nonprofit and we're a registered charity, and we were established 21 years ago in 1998. And we have an office in Goderich on the square, and it is open to the public if any of you ever want to stop by and say hello. We do have a small but mighty team, I like to say, of 3 full-time staff, and we have a volunteer board of directors, and we also work with many different consultants and technical advisors. And we work with them on our science-based coastal restoration, education, and research projects. And we do work along the entire Canadian side of Lake Huron. We're pretty unique in that we get to spend 100% of every single day working on Lake Huron issues. It's a pretty amazing thing to be able to do. But unfortunately, one of those issues that we're finding out about is plastic pollution in Lake Huron and in our Great Lakes and in our oceans, of course. This is a photo you'll see on your screen of a balloon floating near the Goderich Harbor that I took last summer. So plastic pollution, I think a lot of us have probably heard about the huge patches of garbage that we're finding in our oceans. So a lot of the plastic debris in the oceans, it collects into what are called ocean gyres. So ocean currents swirl all the garbage together into these kind of central locations. And these gyres are described as an enormous sea of floating plastic debris. And unfortunately, marine researchers have discovered a garbage patch in every single ocean on our planet. One estimate suggests that the North Pacific garbage patch might be close to the size of Texas, which is very alarming. And in some areas of our oceans, experts are saying that plastic outnumbers sea life 6 to 1 at this point. But what about the Great Lakes? That's what we're all about here at the Coastal Center. Now, our watersheds around the Great Lakes, they're heavily urbanized. We have a lot of people living on the shores of these Great Lakes in the US and Canada. And this means that there's a large source of potential plastic pollution that can end up entering our Great Lakes. Now, since water flows from Lake Superior, flows down to Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, then on to Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, and then out the St. Lawrence into the Atlantic Ocean. So the Great Lakes can be, therefore, a huge potential upstream source of plastic pollution that can end up contributing to the North Atlantic gyre in particular. We're starting to realize now that plastic pollution is a major problem in the Great Lakes as well as our oceans. And there have been a lot of studies on this recently. Now, a study in 2012 found that if you combine Lake Superior, Lake Huron, and Lake Erie together, they contain double the number of plastic items per square meter if you compared that with the South Pacific and the North Atlantic gyres. So double the number of plastic pieces. That's a staggering statistic. And only the North Pacific Gyre, the biggest one, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, only it has more plastic than our Great Lakes. So just to give you an idea about Lake Huron in particular, unfortunately, Lake Huron alone receives 600 metric tons of plastic pollution every single year. So that is around 40 dump trucks full of plastic entering our lake. So we started a project last year called the Lake Huron Microplastic Awareness Project, where we wanted to raise awareness about this issue in the Great Lakes and in Lake Huron, and we wanted to study the types and quantity of plastic that we were finding in the lake. So we asked our Coast Watchers volunteers, I know there's a lot of you out there tonight listening, so we asked you to go out and collect water samples for us. And then we brought those water samples back to the office, we filtered them, and we worked with volunteers to analyze these water samples and look at them under the microscope. And we had 68 water samples come in from our wonderful volunteers, and unfortunately only 6 of them had no evidence of microplastics whatsoever. So this meant that 91% of our samples taken from Lake Huron had evidence of microplastics in them, which is a very alarming statistic. So you'll see on your screen there's a map of where all of the water samples were collected, and the red areas were where we had 40 or more pieces of plastic per sample, and the yellow were the least number of plastic per sample. So we had quite a large concentration in Goderich, which we would want to look into a little bit further before jumping into any conclusions. But we also had, quite a bit in the Kincardine, Port Elgin, Sarnia area, Wasaga Beach type thing. So this was a good start at looking at what types of plastic we have in Lake Huron, and we would like to continue that research. So how does plastic pollution end up in the Great Lakes and oceans? Well, there are a number of different sources. Garbage can enter our waterways through illegal dumping, of course, from domestic and industrial sources, and also from the fishing industry. So an organization called the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup found that fishing-related items made up around 1 to 2% of items found during shoreline cleanups in Canada. So that doesn't sound like a lot, just 1 to 2%. But if we look at the oceans, there was a study done by an organization called Ocean Cleanup recently, and they found that at least 46% of the plastic found in the Great Pacific Gyre is made up of fishing-related items. So almost half of that garbage is from fishing. And it's estimated that around 640,000 tons of fishing gear is lost and pollutes the oceans every single year. And the nets that are left floating through the water are sometimes called ghost nets. And these are a real danger to marine wildlife. Some of the larger ghost nets have been found with hundreds of dead animals caught in them. And on your screen, you should see a picture of a gray seal that was caught in a fishing net. And fortunately, he was rescued by the Scottish SPCA, and he was able to be released with a clean bill of health. But a lot of other animals aren't so lucky. So living on the Great Lakes, this might not be a major issue for us yet, or it might just be that we don't have the data to show that it's an issue at this time. But regardless, it is something that we all need to be aware of as a problem. And garbage can also enter the Great Lakes and oceans through both intentional and unintentional littering, of course, and through poor waste management practices. So this can be due to poorly managed landfill sites or even overflowing recycling and waste containers. So this picture on your screen is a photo that I took on a Lake Huron beach, and people were trying to do the right thing and dispose of their garbage where it should go, and even in the recycling, but unfortunately the amount of trash just overwhelmed the garbage cans before it could be picked up, and This doesn't just happen on municipal properties and municipal beaches. I've personally seen recycling blowing down the street out of people's personal recycling bins. And this is a problem because any litter that is on the streets or shoreline, of course, whether left there intentionally or unintentionally, can be washed into the lake by rain or by snow melt, or it can be blown by the wind into our waterways. So I just wanted to mention that we were watching in the office today a short video that was made in 2010. It's called the Majestic Plastic Bay, and it's a really entertaining example of this. It's a mockumentary, they call it, and it's kind of set up like a wildlife documentary, but it's about a plastic bags journey. So I won't show that to you tonight, but if you have a chance and want to laugh, I would encourage you to check it out. So the link is on the slide, or you can just search for it on YouTube as well. So now we know that there's definitely plastic in our lake and how it can get there, but why is this a problem? So let's discuss some of the impacts of plastic pollution. And one of the first major impacts is on our water quality. And in the Great Lakes, we have 20% of the world's fresh water, and Lake Huron is the drinking water source for 1.6 million people. So impacts on our water quality are a big problem for us humans. And plastics, in particular, they attract toxic persistent organic pollutants, or POPs. So they attract those POPs to their surface and can carry these toxins. And some of these are very dangerous, like DDT and PCBs and dioxins that can have a negative impact on our drinking water quality, of course. Another major impact of plastic pollution, very well known, is the impact on wildlife. Plastic is often mistaken for food by wildlife, which can present a choking hazard. It can damage their internal organs and cause blockages. And many birds have been found to have their stomachs filled with plastic, and they end up feeling full and starving to death. And of course, I just mentioned that these plastics attract these POPs, and so that exposes these animals to these toxic pollutants as well. And plastic pollution is causing the death of many animals. Entanglements is another issue when it comes to wildlife. Many wildlife are curious and want to check out these new items that they might see floating around, or they might just be seeking food resources and they could get caught up in things. And some animals have even been found to be using plastic as shelter, which is very sad to me. I've seen some interesting pictures, one's on your screen, of a little crab that's been using a plastic cap as a home. And of course, the famous picture of Peanut the turtle, who got caught in the six-pack ring there. Another plastic impact that I wanted to talk about is biomagnification. So recent studies are showing that there are often tiny bits of plastic in fish and shellfish. They've found tiny bits of plastic in animals even as small as water fleas. These animals are only 3 millimeters long, and they have teeny tiny bits of plastic inside of them. So we know that fish and other animals are accumulating these plastic particles in their bodies. And as those small animals are consumed by larger animals, those larger animals end up consuming even larger amounts of plastic. So as substances like plastic move up the food chain, affecting animals like humans at the top of the food chain, this process is known as biomagnification. And this is a major concern for humans who rely on seafood for sustenance in many places around the world. Some other plastic impacts would be tourism, of course. We are losing the aesthetic value of our beaches when they're covered in plastic garbage. This picture on your screen was taken in Bali, a beautiful place that has plastic littered all across the beach there. And it can also cause negative effects on recreational activities. There was a very popular video going around social media a little while ago of some divers who were swimming through a sea of plastic. And I know myself, I've been out swimming in Lake Huron a few times and gotten hit with little pieces of garbage, which is disgusting. And of course, these bits of garbage can damage our infrastructure. They can clog up water intakes, and the cost of cleaning up the plastic pollution problem is astronomical. They've estimated that to clean up all of the plastic pollution that's in the Great Lakes right now would cost somewhere around $486 million. So what are the different types of plastic pollution that we're finding? Well, we're finding large pieces, of course, on our shorelines, like food packaging that this gull has found, balloons, fishing materials, and these are often located at the surface, but can be found throughout the water column as well and on our shorelines. Then as these larger items start to break down over time through the sunlight, through the wind, wave action, they start to break down into smaller pieces. So we have our medium-sized plastics, and eventually they turn into our microplastics. So microplastics, which I've been mentioning, they're small pieces of plastic measuring less than 5 millimeters in diameter. So they're very small. And this can include microfibers, it can include broken down fragments of larger items, and then some plastics are manufactured to be that small, like microbeads that you'll see in the center picture. So I would like to talk a little bit about the most common items that we're finding along our shoreline. Now, there's an organization called the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup, and they're amazing. They coordinate shoreline cleanups all across Canada, and they have basically a national database of shoreline litter. So volunteers go out and they use a standard protocol to write down the different types of garbage that they're finding during shoreline cleanups. And then all of this litter data goes into a database. All of the cleanups that we do at the Coastal Center, we enter all of our data into their database. And then this data is really important because it helps decision makers make policies about plastic pollution. So they produced a report on everything that was found last year on Canadian shorelines by volunteers, and they came up with the Dirty Dozen, they called it. So number 12 on the Dirty Dozen list would be, I don't think this will surprise anyone, but it's coffee cups. So 16 billion disposable coffee cups are used every year worldwide. 16 billion. And we found 14,000 of them on Canadian shorelines last year alone, which is a staggering statistic. We're also finding a lot of styrofoam, so almost 19,000 pieces of styrofoam. So 25 billion styrofoam cups are thrown away in the United States alone every year. This picture on your screen is one I took at an event in Goderich last year, and just in a few hours we filled an entire garbage can full of styrofoam. So there has to be a better way. Number 10 was other packaging. So this could be packaging for electronics, cosmetic products. Over half of the world's plastic that was thrown out in 2015 was from packaging, and that was around 141 million tons of plastic packaging. Number 9, this has been a very popular topic in the media over the past few years. That's straws. So more than 500 million plastic straws are used every single day worldwide. 500 million. And we picked up 21,000 in Canada on our shorelines, which is pretty staggering. This picture on your screen is one that I took in Kincardine of a red straw on a beach. Then we have plastic bottles. That was number 8 on the list of the Dirty Dozen, and there were over 21,000 of them picked up on Canadian shorelines last year. So, in the United States alone, 38 billion water bottles are sent to landfill every year. 38 billion. And in Canada, we actually have some of the best municipal tap water in the world, and our tap water regulations are much more strict than those for bottled water. And some recent studies are even showing that there are plastic particles found in bottled water. When you also factor in the outrageous markup on the cost of bottled water, I'm led to believe that we have been subjected to what must be one of the most successful marketing campaigns of all time. We also found a lot of beverage cans. I don't think that's very surprising to anyone, at 23,462 of those found last year. And I don't know how many times I've been at a store and said no thanks to a plastic bag and been given one anyways. That's number 6 on the list. And approximately 1 trillion single-use plastic bags are used each year worldwide. That's not a typo. 1 trillion plastic bags a year. And 26,000 of them showed up on our Canadian shorelines last year alone. The problem with plastic bags as well is that they can often be mistaken for food by wildlife. Number 5 on the list is paper materials. So this is an interesting topic. 44,130 paper materials were picked up on Canadian beaches. And people often ask me, are paper products the answer to our plastic pollution crisis? And my answer is debatable. Paper straws, I think, are a great alternative to a plastic straw. A paper bag is probably a great alternative when faced with the choice between a paper or a plastic bag, but all of these things are still single-use garbage, and it still takes significant resources to make all of these paper products. So I think it's a step in the right direction, but I don't think it's our final solution to our plastic challenges. Number 4 on the list, on the Dirty Dozen list, was bottle caps. There were almost 50,000 of those found on Canadian shorelines last year. And number 3 is food wrappers. We had over 56,000 of them on Canadian shorelines. Now this photo is not from a Canadian shoreline. I took this photo in the Galapagos Islands, and that's somewhere where I expected it to be a pristine, natural environment. And then I came across this young sea lion, and he had picked up an ice cream wrapper, and I'm not sure if he was trying to eat it or play with it or what he was doing with it, but I found that to be a very sobering image. Number 2 on the list found on shorelines was microplastics at 353,000 pieces found. Now, these are mostly going to be small pieces that have broken down from larger items over time while floating around in the lake or the ocean. And these are some of the hardest items to clean up, and a lot of them get missed during beach cleanups. People are generally looking out there for the larger items to pick up, and some of these are so small that they can be really easy to miss, and they get mixed into all of the kind of natural debris on the beach as well, which makes it easy for them to hide there. Number 1 on the list. This kind of surprised me, but then I started to think about it, and I guess it does make sense. But the number 1 item found during shoreline cleanups in 2018 was cigarette butts at 560,000 picked up by volunteers. And I found an interesting statistic that people litter more than 4.5 trillion cigarette butts every year around the world. And cigarette butts are definitely one of the more common items that we find during our Lake Huron shoreline cleanups as well. We had a big beach cleanup in Goderich this year, and our volunteers found almost 5,000 in just one morning. Now, this is a problem because cigarette filters contain around 165 different toxic chemicals, and these chemicals can leach into the surrounding environment, particularly when these cigarette butts are getting wet like they would on a beach. And this can cause problems with soil quality, and it can also damage our water quality. We did a little experiment in the office of putting a cigarette butt into a big jar of water, and the water just turned brown and disgusting. And cigarette butts have also been recovered from the stomachs of wildlife, so animals are eating these by mistake, which can't be good for them. And cigarette butts are also an issue because they take around 10 to 15 years to break down, and the decomposition is very slow in hot and dry areas, so on our beaches in particular. They are made of something called cellulose acetate, which is very slow to degrade, and it never really fully decomposes. So that's a problem. And so our solution is our Butt Free Beach program. So this was a public awareness campaign that we launched back in 2013. And we worked with 10 different municipalities along Lake Huron. And we wanted to provide people with a responsible way to dispose of their cigarette butts. So we've put up a lot of cigarette butt recycling bins, and we provided people with reusable cardboard beach ashtrays as well. And what's really neat is these cigarette butts can be collected and then sent off to a company called TerraCycle, and they're actually able to recycle them into industrial pallets, so we're able to do something useful with them rather than having them sit on our ground and sit on our beaches. Other than the dirty dozen that we're finding on our shorelines, I just wanted to mention a few other plastic pollution offenders. So the first one would be microbeads. And these have been used as exfoliants in cosmetic products. And they are little teeny tiny pieces of plastic, and they have the capability, because they're so small, to bypass our wastewater treatment plants, and then they just end up getting deposited back into the lake. And if you look at products, if you're looking for these microbeads, they are listed generally as polyethylene or polypropylene in the ingredients list. So thankfully, we have a solution for this. There was a comprehensive ban on microbeads in cosmetics. And so back in 2017, regulations were created in Canada, and that prohibits the manufacture, import, and sale of toiletries that contain any plastic microbeads. And this does include non-prescription drugs and natural health products. And for the purposes of these regulations, microbeads are defined as any plastic particle that's less than 5 millimeters in size that's used in one of these products. And this came into effect in July of last year. And Nurdles. This has been another very popular topic lately. So Nurdles are the raw material that are used in plastic production, and they're melted down and molded into all of the many different types of plastic products that we can buy. And they're small, they're between 1 and 5 millimeters in diameter, and they're very dangerous to wildlife because they can be mistaken for food. So in the picture, you see those little white round pellets. Those are the Nurdles, and they kind of look like a type of egg. So they have been found in the stomachs of wildlife. And because they are so small, but have such a great surface area when you have a lot of them, persistent organic pollutants, or POPs, tend to build up on their surfaces. Now, they're really difficult to clean up because they're so small and there's so many of them. And during our beach cleanups, we've been using splatter guards that you would use for cooking, but there really isn't a good solution for cleaning them up yet. So if any of you have any ideas, I'm happy to hear about them. I've seen a few neat ideas. The Yoga Den here in Goderich, some of their youth had a great idea where they're encouraging people to clean up the Nurdles on the Goderich beach. And if you bring in a certain amount of Nurdles, I think you can exchange them for things like a free class pass or something like that. So that's a really neat idea thought up by our local youth. So where are these Nurdles coming from? Well, unfortunately, due to mismanagement of these pellets during transportation and processing, it's led to billions of them being unintentionally released into rivers and oceans. And they are a global problem that's been documented all the way back into the 70s. And it's estimated that around 40 or 53 billion Nurdles are released annually in the UK from the plastic industry. Because they're so small and they're so light and they can be transported so easily throughout our waterways, it's really difficult to locate the original source without sophisticated equipment. And it can often take years or even decades for them to wash up on the shores after a spill. They could be floating around out there for years. For example, a wash up in 2010 that we found between Port Franks and Kincardine, it was found that the plastics found on the shoreline hadn't been manufactured in North America for at least 2 decades. Synthetic clothing is another one. This has recently been found to be polluting our lakes and our oceans. Studies are now finding that the small plastic strands that are shed from clothing, they are actually being found in the stomachs of fish. And I had mentioned our microplastic project that we did last year. And during that project, we found that the majority of the plastics that we were finding in the Lake Huron samples were actually microfibers. So that picture on the screen there is actually a photo that we took through our microscope of a Lake Huron water sample. So you can see those little tiny plastic fibers from clothing. And if you're interested in learning more about what we found during this project, you can always check out our website. It's lakehuron.ca, and there's the full report on there as well. So if you're interested to learn more, please go ahead. And so companies are starting to pay attention to this issue. So clothing companies are looking at it. Studies are even being funded by companies like Patagonia. And there actually are companies also working on creating new products that help capture these microfibers in the washing machines so they don't end up going out into the wastewater treatment plant and into the lake. And this would be really great since I read a study that showed that more than 4,500 fibers can be released per gram of clothing in every single wash that you do. So it's good that there's been new research into this and new innovations, but for now you can help with this program or with this problem, sorry, by looking to purchase clothing that's made out of more natural fibers rather than synthetic fibers. And of course, reducing our overall consumption of clothing helps as well. So thrift shopping is very environmentally friendly and friendly on your wallet. Balloons. I think balloons are one of the things that drives me the most crazy. Balloon releases in particular, because all balloons, including those falsely marketed as biodegradable, if you're releasing them into the air, they're returning to the earth as litter somewhere. And they're one of the most commonly found items in the stomach of animals. They kill countless animals. They can cause dangerous power outages. And they're being found all over the world. This photo on the bottom right of your screen is one that I just took the other day. We were up on a beautiful, pristine island on a rare alvar near the Bruce Peninsula, and you'd expect this to be such a natural, wild place. And here I am finding a penguin balloon just sitting on the shoreline. So that's really sad to see. And on the bottom left, there's a collection of balloons that were found during a very brief shoreline cleanup in the Kincardine area. So there has to be a better way to celebrate. So I have some ideas here of better ways to celebrate. some alternatives to balloon releases or having balloons at parties. I know a lot of people like to do a balloon release as a memorial type thing, but I would suggest maybe you could plant a native tree or plant a butterfly garden. So you're not only honoring your loved one, but you're able to provide shelter and resources and clean air to wildlife and to people. And you could even sponsor a bird bath or a bench in a park that people can enjoy. Candlelight vigils are very popular. Or you could even write a message on seed paper and then plant that message and watch it grow. I've heard of ceremonial bonfires where you write a message to a loved one, a lost loved one, and you throw that into the fire, and then that message goes up into the smoke, into the air, rather than sending it up in a plastic sack. At weddings, there are options like bubbles, or I've even seen that you could create confetti made out of leaves. That's kind of neat. Or you could lend guests ribbon ones if you want to take some fun photos. So we talked about some of the main offenders when it comes to plastic pollution. Now I'd just like to talk about some more ideas for solutions to this problem. So I've talked a lot about our beach cleanups. We try to do a few every year along the Lake Huron shoreline, and we work with many wonderful partnering organizations and volunteers to put these on. In April, we had our great Goddard Shoreline cleanup. We hold that every year around Earth Day. And this year we had 252 people come out to this cleanup, which was amazing to see such a response from our community, to see so many people care about our shoreline. And I'm sure many of you on the line tonight have participated in some of our cleanups, so thank you. It just makes such a huge difference, because at our Goddard cleanup alone, we were able to clean up almost 1,100 pounds of garbage in less than 2 hours. So here's a picture of what we were able to collect as a huge team. We found some interesting items this year. We found a toilet seat, brand new in the packaging. We found a windshield. Last year we found a couple of dehumidifiers and a deep fryer, which was really interesting. So it's always kind of fun to see what we find. And if you're not able to come out to one of our cleanups, you can always host your own shoreline cleanup. So I'd mentioned the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup, so you can go on there. Anyone can host a cleanup, and you can register it on there. It doesn't have to be, 250 people. It can just be you and your family or friends, or maybe working with your Cottagers Association to put something like this on. And all you have to do is go to shorelinecleanup.ca to register your cleanup. You can download all sorts of resources and learn how to track the data so that all of the information you're collecting can go into their national database. So that's pretty neat. Or if you don't think you have time for that, I hope that maybe you have 2 minutes. There's a new global movement called the 2-minute beach clean, and this aims to clean our beaches 2 minutes at a time. It started in the UK, and they suggest that the next time you're out for a walk on the beach, just bring a bag or bucket with you. Just get into that habit of bringing that with you, and have a little competition to see how much you can pick up in 2 minutes. And each and every piece of litter that you pick up is one less that goes on to pollute our drinking water and kill wildlife. And so if you're out there, they do have a hashtag. If you like to share that kind of thing on social media, you can take a picture of what you clean up in 2 minutes and use the hashtag 2-minute beach clean. And if you check that out on social media, you can see what other people are doing too, which is pretty neat. My next idea is plogging. I don't know if any of you have heard of this, but it's the combination of jogging and picking up litter. I know that sounds a little crazy, but if you like to run and you want to get fit and clean up your community at the same time, you can join this global movement. It started in Sweden. Now, shoreline cleanups are great and plogging is great, but I like this quote. If a bathtub was overflowing, you wouldn't reach for a mop. You would turn off the tap, of course. That's common sense. So the mop is a beach cleanup, But if we want to turn off that tap, we have to stop the flow of plastic that's entering our lakes and oceans to begin with. So this is going to take some societal change. It's going to take some changes to regulations, and it's going to take changes that each of you can make every day in your life. So we've all heard of the 3 R's, I think. So reduce, reuse, recycle, of course. But I would like to add a 4th R to that, and that's refuse. So I would like to add that as our first and foremost R. So this is just saying no to plastic. If you don't need it, just say no. So if you're at a restaurant, say no to a plastic straw. If enough people are saying no, the owners of the restaurant might consider maybe only giving them out to people who request them rather than giving them out to every single person. And saying no to plastic bags. Get into the habit of saying no to things you don't need. And of course, as consumers, we're all voting with our dollars. So saying no to plastic pollution, to items that have lots of plastic packaging. So when you're shopping, try to choose items that have less packaging. There's a really neat company called Elate Cosmetics that has made that part of what they built their business on. So they're using more sustainable packaging, bamboo packaging on their cosmetics, and reusable containers, and using seed paper to package things up and ship them. So I like to support companies like that that are being more sustainable with their packaging. So you are the solution to pollution, so make sure you're voting wisely with your dollars. Now, the next in our 4 R's, so that's reduce, so reducing your overall plastic use. So being prepared. You can choose to move towards a lifestyle that is more plastic-free, and you could start by doing this by making a plastic-free kit. So you can do things like buying a glass Tupperware rather than plastic. And maybe if you're going to an event where you know you're going to be served food on disposable items, maybe you bring your own plate or container to use. I do that all the time. And getting into the habit of bringing grocery bags, of course, but trying to make the switch to more sustainable fabric. So rather than purchasing reusable grocery bags that are made of plastic, trying to buy ones that are made of cotton, of more biodegradable materials. I have also made the switch myself to bar soap and bar shampoos rather than purchasing body wash or hand soap or bottles of shampoo, because the cosmetics and personal care industry, they're one of the largest contributors of plastic packaging. And we do find a lot of those items on our shorelines every year. So you can look, a lot of different companies are making bar shampoos now. There's Lush, and if you check out any health food stores, they'll usually have some options. And my last suggestion that I've gotten pretty good at doing recently is bringing your own straw. So I'm guilty of liking to indulge in iced coffees in the summer and things like that. And sometimes you want to use a straw for that. So instead of using a plastic or paper one, I bring my own glass straw. And we do have these available at the Coastal Center. They're in the bottom middle picture there. They're little piping plover glass straws, and they come with a little travel case that makes it easier to carry it around. So the next in the 4 R's is to reuse. So upcycling is kind of a new trendy concept, and it's the process of converting old or discarded materials into something useful and that's often beautiful. So trying to take this garbage and make it into artwork and into functional things. So I've got a few ideas up there on the screen, but this is where you can really get creative. And if you can kind of shift your mindset towards how you can reuse things, it can be a fun project. Now, how do we turn off this metaphorical plastic pollution tap? I think a lot of people think that, recycling is the answer to our plastic pollution issues. So people ask me, is recycling the answer? But unfortunately, the answer is no. Less than 10% of plastic produced globally is recycled. And in Canada, every year, we're producing 3.2 million tons of plastic waste, and less than 9% of that is being recycled. There's also been a lot in the media lately surrounding Canada's recycling industry, so some of you may have been hearing about that. There have been recent policy changes in Asia, and due to those policy changes, we're unable to export the massive quantities of recyclables that we have, that we don't have the facilities for to recycle them here. So this has left officials scrambling for a solution of what to do with all these recyclables. So we're quickly learning that recycling is not the answer to our plastic pollution crisis. So it's still part of the 4 Rs, but I would put that at the very end. The last of our 4 Rs is recycling. And recycling just really needs to be the last resort. So after you've refused, after you've reduced, and after you've reused everything you can, then it's time to recycle. Sometimes I know people wonder, what difference one person can possibly make. I know I feel that way sometimes myself, and it's only one straw, right? Said 8 billion people. But I always like the quote by Margaret Mead, where she said that to never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. And that leads me to my final plastic solution for you tonight, and that's to get involved. You could volunteer or donate to one of many great organizations that are working hard all around the world to find a solution to plastic pollution. Or if there's no one around you, you could even start your own organization to fight this problem. Companies aren't going to change their practices unless consumers speak out and say that they want a change. So you can volunteer or donate to the Coastal Center. There's Blue Bay Fields. There's a brand new group in Goderich of amazing citizens called Green Goderich, so you can always get involved with them. And we have started a hashtag, so if you're social media savvy, you can show off your plastic-free lifestyle by using the hashtag plastic-free-Huron. And you can even visit our website, lakehuron.ca, and take our plastic-free pledge. So that's pretty much it for me. That's all I wanted to say tonight. I really hope that you've enjoyed this and maybe learned something. And if any of you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. Or if you're thinking of something later and you'd like to talk about it some more, you can always stop by our office. It's on the square in Goderich. You can give us a call, or you can always send us an email at coastalcenter@lakehuron.ca. So I'll just give you a few minutes to see if any questions come in, and if not, we can wrap it up. So thank you. Right, so I did have a question come in from Julie. She asked if the US, the other shores of Lake Huron, are on board with these incentives. So that's a great question. Now, I know I'm not as familiar with policies going on in the US with regard to plastic pollution, but I know there are a lot of nonprofits working to help spread this message and to try to increase recycling in the States and to try to study the amounts of microplastics in their lakes and oceans. There's some pretty neat organizations like the Five Gyres Institute. There's the Surfrider Foundation. There are quite a few anyways, but yeah, I'm not as familiar with any policies on that. I'll give it a few more minutes if there are any other questions. I got another question come through from Kathleen. Kathleen said that the red dot at Goderich was startling. Can you tell us any more about that? So Kathleen's referring to the map that I showed of our microplastic sampling that we did last year, and we were finding quite large concentrations of plastic in our water samples found around Goderich, and I think this would require further research before I make any startling conclusions about why we're finding more plastics in Goderich than anywhere else. And you know, we did only take 68 samples along the entire shoreline, so I think this would just be a start of a research project before we kind of jumped to any conclusions. But it could be things like the way that our harbor is set up could be kind of trapping some plastics as they move along the shore. Generally, plastics and sediment are moving from north to south on Lake Huron, so it could be that they're kind of getting trapped around that area. But yeah, I don't want to jump to any conclusions just yet. I had another question come through from Alex. Thanks, Alex. She said, since you started at the LHCCC, have you noticed any measurable change in perceptions and awareness regarding plastics in the Great Lakes or plastic use in general? And I would have to say absolutely. Even just in the past few years, just seeing a lot of local businesses making huge efforts to reduce their plastic. It's just amazing. I know one of the cafes in Goderich made the switch to paper straws rather than using plastic straws, and their owners have stopped selling any drinks that are sold in plastic containers like juice. And so it's really neat to see that awareness growing. And I see a lot of people using our water bottle filling stations in Goderich. We've had a lot of new filling stations installed in the past year, and people are using them. People are carrying their water bottles with them. And I think the biggest thing I've seen is this brand new group, Green Goderich, starting. So we have a group of very passionate local citizens who got together and wanted to tackle this problem. So that's amazing to see. And that's in a very short period of time that I'm seeing these changes. And I had another question here from Jenny. Jenny asked, are there any organized beach cleanups or initiatives in Port Franks that I can get involved with? I'd have to think about that. It would be good to always check with your local conservation authority, because sometimes they will hold beach cleanups and initiatives like that. So that would be a good place to check out. I believe that would be the Asable Bayfield Conservation Authority. And then there's actually going to be a beach cleanup in the Sarnia area, which isn't too far away, this August, on Sunday, August 18th. So that's something you might be able to join in on. And yeah, if you're not finding these types of cleanups, maybe that's something that you can start, or we're always happy to partner on cleanups as well. If you'd like to reach out to the Coastal Center, we do try to plan a few every year. So we love working with other people and organizations to put those on. And I think that was all my questions. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed the first webinar of our series, and hopefully you'll be able to attend a few more over the coming weeks. We have 5 more planned, so hopefully you can join us, and all that information on those webinars is available at lakehuron.ca/upcoming events. So thank you very much, and good night.